So please don't be afraid to get headphones for translation. I'm really honoured to be here and to have been asked to join you today. Thank you so much to Sylvia and to Partnership 2030. I think it's absolutely fantastic that you have a whole week dedicated to student wellbeing. It's important everywhere. Everywhere in Europe has an issue at the minute. My expertise is not specifically in well-being, it's in participation in decision-making. I have a confession. I'm a lawyer, okay? Not an educationalist. And the way that I approach student voice and participation is as a human right, okay? A human right in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. There's been a lot of discussion on participation today, and I think my understanding is slightly different because I come at it as a human right. It's not simply taking part in activities. It's not the same as civic engagement. It's not even the same, although it's definitely related to participatory pedagogy. But this is the right. I don't know, hands up if you've seen this before. Do you know this right, Article 12 of the Convention? And many of you have heard of it. Great, a few, okay. So this provision is in the Convention. The Czech Republic has ratified this convention. So that means that your government has promised that every child will enjoy this right. I present it in two parts. The first part is the right to express views freely. And the second part is the obligation to give them due weight. Okay. I also want to mention the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, because it takes this right and it makes it even stronger for children with disabilities. It says that they must enjoy it on an equal basis with other children, an equal basis with other children, and yet we rarely get that right. Which decisions does it apply to? It says all matters affecting the child, all matters. That is so broad. I want to show you a little method that I have developed for UNICEF. And it's really, in the last year, asking that using this decision wheel, we have asked children, what decisions do they think affect them? What decisions do they want to have a say on? And so we've been asking children to identify where they think they have a say, where they decide, or where they share decision making. And then what we do is we ask them, what would they like to change? Where would they like more of a say? Or maybe where do they not want to have to decide? Where do they think adults should just get on with it, you know? So it's a nice little activity. You can do it just in school on education decisions. We've done that. Very interesting. Anybody interested in football, soccer, football? Any football fans? There's a little one back, two at the back, well done. Our youngest members, both footballers. I have been doing this with the English Football Association. We've been out in clubs all over England, just on football and coaching, and it's really interesting, so I'm just going to show it to you as a tip. Small point, this is a right of individual children. So if we're making a decision about an individual child in school, maybe what school they go to, what they study, what they get assessed on, how they get assessed, the additional provision for their learning needs, they affect individual children. But this is also a right of groups of children. It is a right of collective participation. Okay. So what does that mean? When we are making education decisions that affect children as a group, our national policies on well-being, for example, on child protection, Or our policies in school, if you're a school leader. Your discipline policy, for example, your curriculum policy. Children also have a right as a group. And then something that I have said, I have described this right as a barometer, the weather tester for all rights, because this one right, and I'll say more, is a way in which we deliver all other human rights for children. We cannot deliver their education, their well-being, their protection, their safety, their privacy, if we don't know what they think. So I've been asked to say something about the benefits, and I'm going to connect it to well-being. This is what I used to do. I'd often get asked, so what difference does it make? I've worked with policymakers all over the world, and it's their big question. What's the point? Why would we do this? Why would we put money into this? And my answer is usually very short, and it is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it makes no difference to anything else, because it is a human right. And it shouldn't need to be justified, because human rights are based on dignity, equality, and respect for human worth. And where do we get these? Where do we get a sense of our respect for our own individual worth? We get it because we get to influence the decisions that affect us. As adults, we get to make the decisions that affect us mostly. But for children, they also should be treated with dignity, equality, and respect. And that means when adults are making decisions, and they have to make decisions for children, but when they do, there is an obligation on them to seek children's views and take them seriously. But there is a growing body of evidence on why we do it. And I just want to mention something about child protection, because nothing will destroy well-being more than a child that is not safe. Okay? That a child is not safe from harm, whether that is neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. And there is no way that we can protect children if we have not created the conditions where they can speak to their own experience safely. They can say they are at risk, or they can say that they are being harmed. And we know all over the world, I'm sure it's the same in the Czech Republic, that so often in our histories, when children have tried to say, I am not safe, they have not been taken seriously, and we know the consequences. But to education, I have recently been working with Scotland, their Children's Ombudsman Commissioner, and all of the education agencies, the Inspectorate, the Curriculum Authority, the Education Authority, and I've written an article which she will share later, and in it I have tracked the research on student voice, not participation generally, student voice, and outcomes. And the evidence is not as good as we want it to be, I will not pretend. I also am really conscious of the point made earlier that the evidence is, international evidence is not necessarily what's right here in the Czech Republic. It's dominated for me by English, which means the United States and the UK, Australia. Yet, I want to say to you that in every single one of these areas, there is evidence that listening to children and taking their views into account improves all of these things. We all want children to be educated for democracy. The best place to do that is in the school environment, and the best way to do that is give children and young people a say. There is evidence about attainment, there's evidence about attendance, there's evidence about reduced bullying, better discipline. There is a lot of evidence all connecting schools and environments which have higher responsiveness to students' views, have better outcomes on all of these things. So there's an article I've written, we can send that, I'm sure, Sylvia. And then for this today alone, I prepared a slide. It's a little bit messy, But one of the things that was in my literature review is the link between student participation and well-being. And it's not easy because, as the previous speakers have said, it is so interrelated. It's really hard to show a causation from anything to anything. But I've tried to think of it with the starting point as the child is heard, okay? And so when a child or student's views are sought and taken seriously, I'll come on to space, voice, audience and influence, you can see that we can track that through a sense that they are safe, to a sense of belonging. The more that the child thinks they belong, the more likely they are to attend and engage. The more likely that they are to attend and engage, the more likely that they will build self-confidence, self-esteem, autonomy, and that in itself then improves their capacity to express their views, and so we go. And you can turn that the other way. It goes right round in the other way as well. So I think there is there's a growing body of evidence about the complete significance of respect for children's views in delivering all of these things, including well-being. But this was the one caveat. There's a study from Australia, and I think it was really mentioned earlier today as well. It only delivers, student voice only delivers well-being when it is meaningful. If it is not meaningful, then it can do the opposite. Okay, we've heard that. So you need proper engagement with students' views if you want to enhance well-being. So that's where I come in. So my name is Laura Lundy. I am the author of something that is now known as the Lundy model. I didn't call it the Lundy model, I promise you. I didn't want it to be called the Lundy model, but it is, and I have had to roll with it. It was called the Lundy model by the Irish government, but it is based on my research from over 20 years ago. And it was clear to me, talking to children in Northern Ireland at that time, that something didn't add up. We had teachers and others saying they were listening to children, the voice of the child, but we had our children and our students saying their views were not sought, their views were not taken seriously, or, as was mentioned by one of the young people earlier, you could get in trouble. You could get in trouble if you said what you thought, because you would be considered to be cheeky or challenging authority. Okay? So it didn't add up. And I thought about this concept of the voice of the child, and I thought, it's not good enough. There's something problematic in voice of the child. And I wrote an article called Voice is Not Enough. Voice is not enough. And I suggested that if we want meaningful child and youth student participation, we need space, we need voice, we need audience, and we need influence. Space, and I'm going to put it, as someone has helpfully put it into check, not me. I don't know if this is AI, and I don't know if I've just put rubbish in front of you, but I'm going to show you the check. Obviously, space and voice are about the right to express views, and audience and influence are about the obligation to take them into account. I'm going to go off the check and talk very briefly about each, and then I want to show you lots of practical examples of the Lundy model being used in schools or by education decision makers. So obviously space, we talked a lot about this today, it needs to be a safe space. We have to create the conditions where children and young people will feel they trust people enough to say. You know, and that depends on the child and the context, but it has to be a place of safety and trust. Before that, it has to be actively created. Actively created means if a child comes and tells you something, you're a teacher or a counsellor, you must listen, but you also have to actively create the conditions and spaces where they will. Student councils, student parliaments are one example of that, but they don't do everything. Okay? And then finally, and this is one of our biggest challenges, it's a challenge here, I know it is, it's how do we make it inclusive, non-discriminatory, how do we make it a space for all children? I mentioned children with disabilities earlier in inclusion. I just thought I'd mention this. The European Agency for Special Needs, which is a series of government ministries come together to discuss best practice. They have adapted the Lundy model for children with special needs, and they have lots of material. They call it Voices into Action. So if you're working with children with learning difficulties, you may be interested in that. But I want to give you a really simple, easy, cheap, cost-effective way of listening to all children. And I learned this from one of my former doctoral students, who was a head teacher, a principal in a school which was very deprived in Northern Ireland where I live. And in her first week in her new job, she instinctively wanted to know what students thought. So she brought all the children in the school into one room, this big assembly hall, and she handed out post-its. And she asked them to write on one post-it everything they really liked about the school and they didn't want her to change, okay? And put it on one wall. And then she asked them to write on the other post-it something they did want to change in the school, something that they felt wasn't working and they really wanted to change, and put it on the other wall. And then all the pupils, all the staff left. And she just read the post-its, yeah? And in, packets of post-its, she had a really good sense of what was working in that school and what wasn't. I don't have time to tell you what wasn't, but I will say what I learned from her is that she is the most incredible woman, but it wasn't what most children said. The thing she started to change was what a smaller number of children said with a lot of force and emotion. And it was that the school had a very fixed practice of ability setting. Do you have that? Ability setting? Where children are put into groups dependent on ability. No, it was very fixed in her school, and the children in these lower groups had such strong feelings that she went about changing that practice. Okay, voice, it mentioned earlier, it must be voluntary. But something that wasn't mentioned is that sometimes not speaking at all is saying everything, isn't it? So sometimes silence is expression. Sometimes withdrawal from school is expression, okay? So we have to be careful what we look at. But my two elements are about making sure they can choose the mode of expression. Some young people would be delighted to be up here speaking on a mic. Some young people, it would be their idea of a living hell. And some of you, adults as well, I'm sure. Some children love to draw, some don't. But also, and this is sometimes neglected, is that we can't assume that children have a view about what they think. They just don't. And sometimes they need to be supported to come to a clarified position. And how do we do that? How do we help them? And this is where I think teachers are fantastic. The right teachers know exactly how to deal with these things. It's part of the professional training, but I'm not always accepted. So this is some work I have been doing with the government of Malta, and they have you can look it up, they have a platform called Empowering Children's Participation in Malta. And the little screen is an app. They have created an app, and it's available to, oh gosh, I'm going to go very fast, available to children in schools where they can send in their views, they can put it in on a voice recording, send a picture, type. This goes into the Ministry of Children's Rights in Malta, and they then take it to whichever ministry or government agency, and they get a response, okay? It's quite interesting, but it's the idea. Child-friendly expression, obviously, Again, teachers are really good at this, so I'm going to skip this one. But I will say that I work with the European Commission on this, and I had a school in Ireland, and one of the principals came to me and said, you know, we have all these policies for children, and not one of them is written in a way that children understand. So they picked the bullying policy, and they wrote a child-friendly version. The bullying policy was 20 pages. No child had ever read it, you know, so they created their own version. Okay, audience, more than active listening, it's getting it to the right people, okay? And that sometimes isn't the person they say it to. So think of your school council. Where does it go? If they're talking about food, does it go to catering? Does it go to board of management? It needs to get to the right people. This is another nice example from Ireland. It's a program that is now being rolled out in Ireland. It was created by some students who said they'd like to be able to speak about teaching in the school. And what these students do is they go to classrooms of teachers. It must be voluntary. Okay, the teacher must want them in. It can't be forced on any teacher. And they listen, and then they tell the teacher what they thought was good about the lesson. They don't tell them anything bad. They just tell them, we really like this. And then at the end of the year, these students come and present to the staff away day. All the teachers hear what the students saw was really good in the school. It's called, their motto is, where learners are teachers and teachers are learners. And they love it, and it's why Ireland has really adopted it. And then finally, influence, which is the hard bit. You know, it's obviously we need to take it seriously. And we've talked already about transparency. For me, the most important element is feedback and follow-up. Because from a human rights perspective, this is where adults get to tell children what they have done with what they have said. This is an example from England, a school in Hull, it's hard to say, Hull, and you can see they're working on mental health and well-being. And then they have these charts where they look at, are they giving space, voice, audience, and influence? Are they improving on what children say? This one I'll send you a link to. In Ireland, the Ministry of Education has a dedicated student participation unit. So not just a youth panel, a dedicated student participation unit with actions across the whole ministry. I led the expert review for them, and this is the day that I launched the expert review, which had consultation with hundreds of children. They published Making It Happen. They told those children what they would now be doing to make sure children are heard in Irish educational policy. I haven't much time left, I have 5 minutes. Oh dear. Okay, it's because I'm speaking so slow. If I was in Ireland, I'd have said that in 10 minutes. Ireland has a number of toolkits. Ireland has a national strategy on child and youth participation. Every ministry, every public body has to say what they're doing to engage with children. They have a national framework. The national framework has created these tools that are based on the Lundy model, ways of planning policy, evaluating policy, or the one on the far side, the everyday spaces checklist. These are questions that teachers can ask themselves about their own practice. Head teachers can ask, counsellors, and the idea is you stop and think, how am I doing this? And if you don't have an answer, then something needs to improve. They have created with children checklists, space, voice, audience, and influence. Do children feel heard? These are the statements that children use. I had enough time to talk. Look at that, I had enough time to talk. Lots of questions. I'm doing okay, actually, now I've rushed, I've got time from my last item. So if you're interested in this, I have written a blog and I put together an infographic which captures some of these if you go through, if you can get through to the QR code. There's a blog that explains how these things come together. And what you can do when you can't talk to children is really the blog, but a process for doing it all. for starting, for making it meaningful, for feeding back, for everything. And the final slide is, this is the article that started the Lundy model is in the British Educational Research Journal. And it's now their most cited article ever, I think forever by far. I'll be dead and it's still the most cited, is that apart from space, voice, audience and influence, this is the most coded thing which I'm going to leave you with. You have to see this children's student voice or engaging with children's perspective, not as an optional luxury, that you can decide you do whenever it suits. If you see it the way that the world has agreed as a human right that delivers dignity, equality and respect, and then we're seeing well-being, attendance, and all the other positives, is that you have to understand that this is not a gift of adults, it's an entitlement of the child. Thank you.
Professor Lundy, thank you very much for your presentation. It was an honor to have you here. And I would also like to thank you especially because Czech people tend to be focused only on their small area of Czech Republic, so presenting international approaches to this problematic is very important for us. Thank you very much. And now we have a few minutes for asking questions to Professor Lundy. So if you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask one.
Okay. Hello Laura, thank you so much for the presentation. So, according to your model, which of the 4 elements, in your opinion, are the hardest to reach?
So all 4 are essential and interconnected, but the 2 that are hardest to deliver, in my opinion, are one is space, and that's actually, we know the biggest challenge, probably globally, is being inclusive. That a lot of our work gets to very few children, particularly in schools. So how do we, I've written about the concept of representativeness, are they representative in groups? I don't like that. I think we need to get to as diverse a range of children as possible, and we're not so good at that. And then the other one for sure is influence, is making sure, we know this from the data with children, that there are lots of initiatives to let them speak, they're creative, they're interesting, and they go nowhere, nothing changes. And sometimes that's on small things. Like someone said, I have written a blog, you can Google it, about how the micro is mega, because often in schools children raise small things, well, seemingly small things, like food or break time or toilets. I'm sure toilets are a big issue here, they're an issue everywhere, but they're not small things, children, young people. And people sometimes say to me, but it's the same thing again and again and again, toilets, blah, blah. And then I say, well, if they're so basic, why aren't you changing them? If they're so easy, why are they the same? Why do they keep saying it, So sometimes, so it's that idea of influence, and I haven't time today, but I created a framework for feedback where I ask teachers and others to ask themselves questions like, what have you done and why? The 2 really important questions is, if you cannot do what children say, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes students want something, it's not possible. It's explaining it, it's transparency and accountability. And the other question I think is always a good question is, if students say something that surprises you, you didn't expect, that is a moment to stop right there dead, because it means your perspective and their perspective are different, and you need to understand why, But it is those 2 things. It's being inclusive and actually doing something with what they say. Those are the 2. So space and influence is your answer.
Thank you for the inspiration, Professor Lundy. What I wanted to ask is elaborate on what you already said, that like the Czech system has a large problem if not working with international research and international information, both in youth policy and in education and pedagogical spaces. So I wanted to ask, how does the Irish government reflect international perspectives? And I had an experience with working with ISSU, Secondary School Students Union in Ireland. They're amazing. And I wanted to ask if the Irish government is also somehow working on regional and local youth councils.
Yeah, the Irish government, I mean, I'm not saying this just because I'm Irish and just because they use the Lundy model. They are ahead of the world. The minute they had to host an event last June, they get so much international interest in their work, and they're a small unit. There's a unit called Hub Nanog, the Hub of the Young, and there are so many requests from international governments to see what they do, they couldn't cope. So now they have like an open day once a year, and that's where they present the tools. But so I don't know how much they're looking out. They have the presidency of the European Commission this year, and they have chosen youth participation as their key. I'm keynoting at that in Dublin. They really see themselves now. They didn't used to. They used to be terrible. But I think even ISSU, you know, obviously I've worked with them, and they have, if you're interested in student councils, the Irish Secondary Students' Union have created the most wonderful guidance on student councils and ways in which they can become increasingly meaningful and effective. I actually had it as a slide and cut it. I'm sorry I cut it now. But yeah, I don't know how much they're looking out. Ireland has a very international outlook because we are a nation of immigrants, you know, and so I think they're very open to expertise. But as I was explaining to Clara, one of the things that is really I love about Ireland, so I sound like I'm an Irish tourist word, but one of the things I love is they love their own experts. They respect their own expertise. You know, whenever they have an issue in a ministry, they go to their universities, you know. They're very good about valuing their own, and, you know, I strongly recommend that here in the Czech Republic.
Prostor asi ještě pro jeden dotaz.
Yeah, a question about the inclusion in the Lundy model, because I hope I understood it correctly, but we have like a student council at our school, and basically the members of the council are elected from each class, and I'm curious because the election is not exactly inclusive, I suppose, given that like a more extroverted student is more likely to win in the election or something. So I'm curious, should we prioritize the opinion of the major part of the school through the election, or should we prioritize inclusion and more opinions and all that?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and it's an issue everywhere, is that we know that sometimes student councils become, you know, if they're done in a normal adult democratic way, they can replicate the problems of adult democracy. Let's put it like that. Now, but on the other hand, I want to say that, you know, every child has a right to be heard. So even, and especially students who stand up and go for election, we want that. But there are lots of other ways of choosing student councils that aren't about popularity contests, aren't about elections. I know schools who, for example, just do it by random ballot in the class, and they pull names and say, right, you two are the student, one boy, one girl, student council members, and then if they don't want to do it, the ballot is drawn again. Now you see how that would instantly be more inclusive and more diverse. There are schools who don't have student councils at all. They have systems for taking, you know, complete student body votes on all issues. There are just lots of really interesting ways out there. But I don't want to be dismissive of student councils because, and I've already said about the Irish guidance on this, a really good, diverse student council with direct access to senior decision making can be a really good thing, a really good thing. but sometimes we know it doesn't always work the way it should. Yeah.
Ještě je prostor pro jeden dotaz. Využijeme toho, že tady máme někoho, jako je Laura Lundy. Tak zrovna dva. Tak já se omlouvám tady pánovi, tady blíž a půjdu dál.
Thank you very much for a nice presentation. I'm also working in the field of youth participation, mostly at European level, and I'm happy that you had in one slide information about importance of information in the youth participation. Because in our partnerships, in our projects, we are always promoting that there cannot be effective participation without quality information. Are you also dealing with this topic in your work, and can you maybe elaborate more on that part?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I don't know if we can go back to the slide. I was very fast on it. It's on just after voice, but it was, I have written guidance for the European Commission. My understanding is it's translated into all 27 languages. Let me see. I think it's just after that one. Oh, that one. So it's this guidance is European Commission guidance, and I wrote it. It's a way of creating child-friendly documents. But can I tell you, it's actually been superseded, and it has been superseded by AI. You know, if you want to get a really good start to a child-friendly document, you could take your school bullying policy, put it into AI and say, summarize this in 4 pages so a 10-year-old can understand, and you'll have a really good start. It's not perfect, because my guidance says that you must work with children and young people to be sure it's the language they understand. But there are lots of ways now we can create really good child-friendly information. But I completely agree with you. You see that, oh, I haven't got it. Often people will say to me, children and young people had nothing to say. I went to ask them about this policy, they had nothing to say. They never have nothing to say, you know. But they haven't had the time to come work through it, to understand different positions, to come to their own position. And information is critical to that. They absolutely need access to good information. And this is the school policy from a school in Dublin. It's the child-friendly version of the bullying policy. And there's a word on there that I think you won't know. Yeah, it's written how these children in a very deprived school in Dublin would understand bullying. So you see that it says slagging off. Do you know this term, slagging off? No, you couldn't. It's a real Dublin or Irish term for nasty teasing. You know, so it's described to these children, you shouldn't tease in this nasty way, yeah? But it's very particular. And I think once we create that, I mean, bullying was mentioned this morning. Everyone has a problem with bullying, yeah? Everyone? And bullying destroys well-being. It destroys it. We have all the evidence of that, yeah? So I think we need bullying policies that are created with children and young people, and then are explained to children and young people in ways they understand. Yeah.
Tak jo, děkujeme moc. Thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you here. And me with Aneshka, we participated for more than 4 years, and it's great to see different perspective from the international one. Thank you so much.
Thank you.